Well, that really is an astonishing story, isn't it? And that hymn, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, has to be one of the all-time favourites for most of us. It's a great hymn. The music is fabulous. It was first written by a man called William Williams. That was an imaginative choice of a Christian name, wasn't it, folks? William Williams, a Welshman. It was written, he was a contemporary in Wales. He was a big-time hymn writer. In fact, he was to the Welsh what Charles Wesley was to the English. Now, Charles Wesley wrote nearly 9,000 hymns. So, he wrote a lot. But problem is that when you translate from Welsh to English, it doesn't translate too well. So, there are only a couple of those hymns written by this fantastic spiritual giant, William Williams, in our hymn book. One of those hymns is that Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, the hymn we sang today. And thank you for singing it with such enthusiasm. Thank you for singing it so well. Thank you for singing it like Methodists. Oh, that was absolutely wonderful. And you know, in essence, the two hymns that I had today should really have been in a different order, because there we are in the second hymn asking for all the things that in the first hymn we're thanking God for giving us. The first hymn says, you know, it's a hymn of thank, great is your faithfulness, O God, my Father. Morning by morning, new mercies I see, etc., etc. We're thanking God for guidance. We're thanking God for sustaining us on life's journey. And the second hymn, we're asking him to do just that. But the reason I put them in that order is simple. I put them in that order simply so that it would set the tone for the sermon. Particularly the last verse, which is, when I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious fears subside. Stop, Ian. Question. What's he talking about when he says, when I tread the verge of Jordan? Anybody like to suggest? When what? He's talking about when you reach the end of your life and contemplate moving on to what is beyond it. When I tread the verge of Jordan, when I reach that point where I am, as it were, camped on the other bank, I look across, what is there for me? And he proclaims, songs of praises, I will ever give to thee, I will ever give to thee. That great affirmation of faith that the God who has always been there, that the God who has always done, that God will continue to do. Same affirmation is made in that wonderful 23rd Psalm, where the guy recounts, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, etc., etc. He relates his whole experience of being with God. And in the final stanza he says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As God has been, so he will be. It is a wonderful, wonderful message. Now, so we've had two hymn writers. We've had a psalmist. Now you get me. I have to say, in my life, that God has always been there for me. Despite the fact that I can echo the words of St. Paul. Now, St. Paul lamented in Romans. He said, the things I do, I don't do. And the things that I want to do, I don't do, and the things that I don't want to do, I do. Yes, I can experience the same sort of thing as the looking back upon Israel and all they did. One of the prophets, Hosea, said, he likened it to the relationship he had with his wife. His wife was unfaithful to him. Her name was Gomer. And he still loved Gomer despite her unfaithfulness. And this was, as he saw it, how God still loved Israel, despite what the people did. This is how I see it, that my God still loves me, despite what I am, despite what I may do. And this idea of undeserved grace extending to me is something that I miracle at each day of my life. I absolutely am amazed at how this works. Let me talk now about the treading the verge of Jordan. I've done it 3 times in recent times. First time, well, let's talk about doing it in reality. Last year, after spending the winter here, my wife and I flew to the country of Jordan. We flew into Amman. We were fortunate to get there at the middle of the night, and fortunate enough that the people that were supposed to meet us didn't, because he owed us one. Next morning, when he finally embarrassed fronted up to the hotel, he said, "What would you like to do?" We said, "We would like to go to Bethany beyond Jordan, where John the Baptist was baptizing, where Jesus most likely was baptized himself." We went to Bethany beyond Jordan, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most spiritually moving things that I have ever done. It was Sunday morning. There was some nuns were singing, beautifully singing by the Jordan. On the Jordan side, there were 2 bored-looking soldiers armed to the teeth, and on the Israeli side, which is about as far away from me as our friend with the camera, were 2 bored-looking Israeli soldiers armed to the teeth. There in the middle, people were going and dipping themselves in the Jordan. I did so myself. I made the sign of the cross upon my forehead. There were people who were actually having a baptism ceremony there, and it was a most beautiful time. I walked out as if I was walking on air, because I had been where something holy had taken place. Another time I trod the verge of Jordan was here in this chapel. Some years ago, winter time, I was preaching. By the end of the service, I was plainly ill. I went out the back there, and a lady who is a doctor, who is, I'm happy to say, with us today, came and said, "What's the trouble?" I told her of the diagnosis that I'd had from the Aspen Valley Hospital. I had an aneurysm on my ascending aorta. I didn't realize it was any big deal, and then on the Tuesday morning, I had to go and start phoning doctors to try and get an appointment. Now, I mean, can you imagine? You come to Australia, right? You're in Australia, you get sick. Doctor says to you, "Oh, you've got this blur, which you don't really understand, but we can't fix it here because, we haven't got one of those doctors that fix burbers in Aspen." So, you have to start making phone calls. Look, my name is, and I am an American visiting Sydney, and I'd like an appointment. Look, can you imagine? Okay. So, everything was taken care of, thanks to the fact that there was a lady there. They flew me to Minneapolis in their own plane, and I lived with that family. It was a wonderful, blessed occasion. I got fixed up, and so well that less than 3 months later, I was hiking through the jungles of Papua New Guinea. So, they did a good job. I trod the verge of Jordan, but I had to prepare myself for the worst. What would happen if? Then last year, I was diagnosed with cancer. And again, I had to think of what if I was treading the verge of Jordan? I was looking across the water, as it were. I had to think about what lay beyond. And of course, I could have that faith, that beautiful faith that what the God whose fellowship I had known all of my life, the God who's had extended goodness and mercy and grace to me, and I didn't deserve it, that God would still be with me on that journey. It was a beautiful, beautiful time. Now, there's something else I'd like to share with you. I have to tell you that when I first became a Christian, I had flirted with it before I became. And when flirting with it as a teenager, I went and I trained as an intelligence gathering operative at the famous Bletchley Park in England. They had a mantra at Bletchley Park: whatever you are told, test, test, test. Test the evidence. Get the evidence from as many places as you can. Compare this with this before you arrive at a conclusion. I went out one day, by myself, a paperback, just after I'd graduated, a novel, and wound up spending a day's pay because there was a Bible, and I thought, I better have one of those. And because I'd paid nearly a day's pay, I thought, better read it. So I set to read it. I started with the New Testament. Fabulous stuff. Stories of Jesus. I could relate them to what I'd learned in Sunday school. Super. Paul. I enjoyed reading about the Acts of the Apostles, the things Paul did and so on, because I'd seen that in a comic book we had once on the back page. Every week they'd have something, an excerpt from Paul. Great stuff. So I turned to the Old Testament. And then I got to this book we read today, the book of Joshua. And it seemed to me that what I was reading about was a tribal God who favoured one tribe over another tribe to the extent that he was condoning all the things that I thought to me most repulsive: genocide, ethnic cleansing, infanticide, you name it. That's how it seemed to me. And I couldn't reconcile this image of God with the God whose presence I was starting to feel in my own life, with the God I'd read about with Jesus Christ. Can you understand? I just couldn't reconcile it. So, what was I to do? Very fortunately, several years later, after I had already become a converted Christian, I was invited home to dinner at a minister's place. And we talked long into the night, and for the first time I expressed the feelings that I have just described to you. And I left with an armful of books. And I have to this day I have been a blotting paper absorbing biblical scholarship because I love it. And I realized then what I had to do was turn off my critical faculties that were nitpicking and saying, well, this doesn't go with this, and say, what was the guy who wrote that down trying to convey to me? What was he trying to say to me? That's the question. That is what I would need to answer. What's being said to me in this passage? And when I read the passage again, I'm reading that what God is saying in all of this is, it's all about divine providence. He will provide. He will provide. And centuries later, when somebody writes down the account, then the account may be slightly coloured. I mean, the numbers are difficult. How could 2 million people go into the Sinai desert? It's a physical impossibility. How could 2 million people be administered? It's a physical, but obviously something's got lost somewhere in the translation. There are all kinds of things which scholars come up by saying, hey, these numbers, let's look at these numbers again, and so on. So I then, to this day, remain. I love it. Nobody loves the stories more than me. But now, I think after that day, I resolved I would know my God better. I would read these things again, which I did, and I would always have as my underlying mantra, not the nitpicking intelligence analyst, but what was the author of those words trying to say to me? He's trying to say to me that the hand of God was with these people. They couldn't possibly have survived in the desert. We were in the desert. We went to the places Moses visited last year. There is no way those people could have survived without God's providence, without God looking out for them. No way at all. No way at all. And that's the message that I was to get from all of this. I've used up my time. I will simply say this. You know, treading the verge of Jordan, I've done it, and I can affirm to this congregation my belief that the God who sustained me this side of the Jordan would have sustained me had I crossed the Jordan at that time. W.C. Fields says, growing old is not for sissies. Let's all of us resolve to grow old in the sure and the certain knowledge that the best is yet to come.